Chapter 19. In the Trap. Speaker, being more practical, flipped the emergency siren. The multiple frequency scream went on and on. Lewis wondered if the puppeteer would answer at all. The boy who cried wolf. But Nessus was crying, yes, yes, with the volume too loud. Of course, he'd had to get downstairs first. "We are under attack," Speaker told him. "Some agency is flying our vehicles by remote control. Have you suggestions?" You couldn't tell what Nessus was thinking. His lips, twice too many, loose and broad and knobbled to serve as fingers, moved continually, but without meaning. Would the puppeteer be able to help, or would he panic? "Turn your intercoms about to give me a view of your path. Are either of you hurt?" "No, but we are stuck," said Lewis. "We can't jump, we're too high, moving too fast. We're headed straight for the Civic Center." "For what?" "The cluster of lighted buildings, remember?" "Yes." The puppeteer seemed to consider. "A bandit signal must be overriding the signals from your instruments." "Speaker, I want readings from your dashboard." Speaker read off while he and Lewis drew ever closer to the lights of the central city. At one point, Lewis interrupted. "We're passing that patch of suburbia with the streetlights." "Are they indeed streetlights?" "Yes and no. All the oval doors of the houses glow bright orange. It's peculiar. I think it's honest street lighting, but the power's been dimmed and cooled by time." "I concur," said Speaker to Animals. "I hate to nag, but we're getting closer. I think we're headed for the big building in the middle." "I see it. The double cone with lights only in the top half." "That's the one." "Lewis, let me try to interfere with the bandit signal. Slave your cycle to mine." Lewis activated the slave circuit. His cycle slammed hard up against him, as if he'd been booted in the butt by a giant foot. An instant later, the power cut off entirely. Crash balloons exploded before and behind him. They were shaped balloons, and they interlocked around him like a pair of clasped hands. Lewis could not so much as move his hands or turn his head. He was falling. "I'm falling," he reported. His hand, pressed against the dashboard by the balloons, still touched the slave circuit. Lewis waited another moment, still hoping the slave circuit would take hold. But the beehive houses were coming too close. Lewis shifted back to manual. Nothing happened. He was still falling. With a calm that was sheer braggadocio, Lewis said, "Speaker, don't try the slave circuit, it doesn't work." And because they could see his face, he waited with his face immobile and his eyes open. Waited for the Ringworld to slap him dead. Deceleration came suddenly, pushing hard upward on the cycle. The cycle turned over, leaving Lewis Wu head down under 5 Gs of pull. He fainted. When he came to, he was still head down, held by the pressure of crash balloons. His head was pounding. He saw a hazy, crazy vision of the puppet master, cursing and trying to get his strings untangled, while the puppet Lewis Wu dangled head down over the stage. The floating building was short and wide and ornate. Its lower half was an inverted cone. As the fly cycles approached it, a horizontal slit slid open and swallowed them. They were passing into the dark interior when Speaker's fly cycle, which had been edging closer to Lewis's, quietly turned over. Balloons exploded around Speaker before he could fall. Lewis scowled in sour satisfaction. He had been miserable long enough to appreciate the company. Nessus was saying. Your inverted attitude implies that you are being supported by fields electromagnetic in nature. Such fields would support metal, but not protoplasm, with the result. Lewis wriggled against his confinement, but not too hard. He would fall if he wriggled free of the balloons. Behind him the door slid shut, just faster than Lewis's eyes could adjust to the dark. He saw nothing of the interior. He couldn't guess how far down the floor might be. He heard Nessus saying, "Can you reach it with your hand?" And the speaker, "Yes, if I can push between the... Yeah, you were right. The casing is hot." "Then your motor has been burnt out. Your fly cycles are inert. Dead." "Fortunate that my saddle is shielded from the heat." "We can hardly be surprised if the Ringworlders were adept at harnessing electromagnetic forces. So many other tools were denied them. Hyperdrive, thrusters, induced gravity." Lewis had been straining to see something, anything. He could turn his head, slowly, his cheek scraping against the balloon's surface. But there was no light anywhere. Moving his arms against the pressure, he felt across the dashboard until he thought he had found the headlight switch. Why he expected it to work, he could not have said. The beams went out tight and white and bounced dimly back from a distant curved wall. A dozen vehicles hung about him, all at the same level. There were packages no larger than a racing jet backpack, and others as large as flying cars. There was even a kind of flying truck with a transparent hull. Within the maze of floating junk, a fly-cycle held speaker to animals upside down. The Gazin's bald head and hairy orange mask protruded below the shaped crash balloons, and one clawed hand had been pushed forcefully out to touch the side of the cycle. "Good," said Nessus. "Light. I was about to suggest that. Do you both understand the implication? Every electrical and electromagnetic circuit in your vehicle has been burned out, provided it was working when you were attacked. Speaker's vehicle, and presumably yours, Lewis, was attacked again as you entered the building." "Which is pretty clearly a prison," Lewis forced out. His head felt like a water balloon being filled too full, and he had trouble speaking. But he couldn't let the others do all the work, even if the work was only speculating on alien technology while hanging a head down. "And if it's a prison," he went on, "then why isn't there a third zap gun in here with us, in case we should happen to have working weapons, which we do?" "There unquestionably is one," said Nessus. "Your headlamps prove that the third zap gun is not working. The zap guns are clearly automatic, otherwise someone would be guarding you. It should be safe for Speaker to use the slaver digging tool." "That's good news," Lewis said, "except that I've been looking around." He and Speaker were floating upside down in an airborne Sargasso Sea. Of 3 archaic flying jetpacks, one was still occupied. The skeleton was small, but human. Not a trace of skin remained on the white bones. The clothing must have been good, for shreds of it still survived. Brightly colored rags, including a tattered yellow cloak that hung straight down from the point of the flyer's jaw. The other packs were empty, but the bones had to be somewhere. Lewis forced his head back. The basement of the police building was a wide, dim, conical pit. Around the wall were concentric rings of cells. The doors were trapdoors above the cells. There were radial stairways leading down to the pit at the apex. In and around the pit were the bones Lewis was searching for, shining dimly back at him from far below. He couldn't wonder that one man in a ruined flying pack had been afraid to turn himself loose. But others, trapped here in cars and backpacks, had preferred the long fall to death by thirst. Lewis said, "I don't see what Speaker is supposed to use the slaver disintegrator on."
"I have been thinking about that very seriously.
If he blows a hole in the wall, it doesn't help us. Likewise the ceiling, which he can't reach anyways. If he hits the generator for the field holding us here, we fall 90 feet to the floor. But if he doesn't, we'll be here until we starve, or until we give up and turn ourselves loose. Then we fall 90 feet to the floor."
"Yes."
"That's all. Just yes."
"I need more data. Will one of you please describe what you see around you? I see only part of a curved wall."
They took turns describing the conical cell block, what they could see of it in the dim point source light. Speaker turned on his own lights, and that helped. But when Lewis ran out of things to say, he was still trapped, upside down, without food or water, hanging above a lethal drop. Lewis felt a bubbling scream somewhere in him, buried deep and well under control, but rising. Soon it would be near the surface, and he wondered if Nessus would leave them. That was bad. It was a question with an obvious answer. There was every reason why the puppeteer should leave, and no reason why he should not. Unless he still hoped to find civilized natives here. The floating vehicles and the age of the skeletons both indicate that there is nobody tending the machinery of the cell block, Speaker speculated. The fields that trapped us must have collected a few vehicles after the city was deserted. But then there were no more vehicles on the Ringworld. So the machines still work, because nothing has strained their powers in so long a time.
"That may be so," said Nessus, "but someone is monitoring our conversation."
Lewis felt his ears prick up. He saw Speaker's fan out.
"It must have required excellent technique to tap a closed beam. One wonders if the eavesdropper has a translator."
"What can you tell about him?"
"Only his direction. The source of the interference is your own present whereabouts. Perhaps the eavesdropper is above you."
Reflexively, Lewis tried to look up. Not a prayer. He was head down, with 2 crash balloons and the fly cycle between him and the ceiling. "We've found the Ringworld civilization," he said aloud.
"Perhaps. I think a civilized being could have repaired the third zap gun, as you called it. But the main thing... Let me think."
And the puppeteer went off into Beethoven or the Beatles or something classical sounding. For all Lewis could tell, he was making it up as he went along. And when he said, "Let me think," he meant it. The whistling went on and on. Lewis was getting thirsty and hungry, and his head was pounding. He had given up hope several separate times when the puppeteer came back on.
"I would have preferred to use the slaver disintegrator, but it is not to be. Lewis, you will have to do it. You are primate descended, better than Speaker at climbing. You will secure climbing. When I finish, you may ask questions, Lewis. Secure the flashlight laser from wherever you put it. Use the beam to puncture the balloon in front of you. You will have to snatch at its fabric as you fall. Use it to climb over the fly cycle until you are balanced on top. Then you're out of your mind. Let me finish, Lewis. Lewis. The purpose of all this activity is to destroy the zap gun, as you called it. Probably there are 2 zap guns. One is over the door you entered by or under it. The other may be anywhere. Your only clue may be that it looks like the first zap gun.
Sure, and it may not. Never mind that. How do you expect me to grab at the fabric of an exploding balloon fast enough to... No, I can't.
Lewis, how can I reach you if a weapon waits to burn out my machinery?
I don't know.
Do you expect Speaker to do the climbing?
Can't cats climb? Speaker said, "My ancestors were plains cats, Lewis. My burnt hand is healing slowly. I cannot climb. In any case, the Leaf Eater's proposition is insane. Surely you see that he is merely looking for an excuse to desert us." Lewis saw. Perhaps he let the fear show.
"I will not leave you yet," Nessa said. "I will wait. Perhaps you will conceive of a better plan. Perhaps the eavesdropper will show himself. I will wait."
Lewis Wu, wedged upside down and motionless between 2 shaped balloons, naturally found it difficult to measure time. Nothing changed. Nothing moved. He could hear Nessa's whistling in the distance, but nothing else seemed to be happening. Eventually, Lewis started counting his own heartbeats. 72 to the minute, he figured. Precisely 10 minutes later, he was heard to say, 72. 1. What am I doing? Were you speaking to me, Lewis? Tangent, Speaker, I can't take this. I'd rather die now than go crazy first. He began forcing his arms down. I command, Lewis, under combat conditions. I order you to remain calm and wait. Sorry. Lewis forced his arms down. Relax. Jerk down. Relax. There it was, his belt. His hand was too far forward. He forced his elbow back. Relax. Jerk back. What the puppeteer suggests is suicide, Lewis. Maybe. He had it. The flashlight laser. 2 more jerks freed it from his belt and pointed it forward. He would burn into the dashboard, but would not burn himself. He fired. The balloon collapsed slowly. As it did, the one at his back pushed him forward into the dashboard. Under the lighter pressure, it was easy to push the flashlight laser into his belt and to clutch 2 handfuls of wrinkling, collapsing fabric. He was also sliding out of his seat. Faster, faster, he gripped with manic force, and when he turned over, falling, his hands did not slip on the fabric. He hung by his hands beneath his fly-cycle, with a 90-foot drop below, and... Speaker! Here I am, Lewis. I have secured my own weapon. Shall I pop the other balloon for you? Yes! It was right across his path, blocking him entirely. The balloon did not collapse. On one side of it puffed dust for 2 seconds, then disappeared in a great puff of air. Speaker had zapped it with 1 beam of the disintegrator. Finnegan knows how you can aim that thing, Lewis wheezed. He began to climb. It was easy going while the fabric held out. Translate. Despite the hours he had spent with blood flowing to his brain, Lewis managed not to let go. But the fabric ended in the vicinity of the foot throttle, and the cycle had rolled half over with his weight, so that he still hung from underneath. He pulled himself close against the cycle, braced himself with his knees. He began to rock. Speaker to Animals was making curious sounds. The cycle rocked back and forth, further with each swing. Lewis assumed, because he had to, that most of the metal was in the belly of the cycle. Otherwise the cycle would roll, and wherever he placed himself, Lewis would be underneath, and therefore Nessus would not have made the suggestion. The cycle rolled far. Lewis, nauseated, fought the urge to vomit. If his breathing passages got clogged now, it was all over. The cycle rolled back and over and was precisely upside down. Lewis lunged across the underside and snatched at the other end of the collapsed balloon, and had it. The cycle continued its roll. Lewis was flattened chest down against the belly of the machine. He waited, clinging. The inert hulk paused, hesitated, rolled back. His vestibular canals spun, and Lewis lost, what? Yesterday's late lunch. He lost it explosively, in great agonizing heaves, across the metal and across his sleeve. But he didn't shift his position more than an inch. The fly cycle continued to heave like the sea, but Lewis was anchored. Presently he dared to look up. A woman was watching him. She seemed to be entirely bald. Her face reminded Lewis of the wire sculpture in the banquet hall of the Heaven Tower. The features and the expression. She was as calm as a goddess or a dead woman, and he wanted to blush or hide or disappear. Instead, he said, "Speaker, we're being watched. Relay to Nessus." "A minute, Lewis. I am discomposed. I made the mistake of watching you climb." "Okay, I thought she was bald, but she isn't. There's a fringe of hair-bearing scalp that crosses over her ears and meets at the base of her skull. She wears the hair long, more than shoulder length." He did not say that her hair was rich and dark, falling past one shoulder as she bent slightly forward to watch Lewis woo, nor that her skull was finely and delicately shaped, nor that her eyes seemed to spear him like a martini olive. "I think she's an engineer. She either belongs to the same race or follows the same customs. Have you got that?" "Yes. How can you climb so? It seemed that you defied gravity. What are you, Lewis?" Clutching himself to his dead fly cycle, Lewis laughed. It seemed to take all his strength. "You're a cadaptist," he said. "Admit it." "I was raised so, but the teachings did not take." "Sure they didn't. Have you got Nessus?" "Yes, I used the siren." "Relay this. She's about 20 feet from me. She's watching me like a snake. I don't mean she's intensely interested in me. I mean she's not interested in anything else at all. She blinks, but she never looks away. She's sitting in a kind of booth. There used to be glass or something in 3 of the walls, but that's gone, leaving not much more than some stairs and a platform. She's sitting with her legs over the edge. It must have been a way of watching the prisoners. She's dressed in, well, I can't say I go for the style. Knee-length and elbow-length overalls, ballooning out, but aliens wouldn't be interested in that. The fabric is artificial, obviously, and either it's new or it's self-cleaning and very durable. Lewis interrupted himself because the girl had said something. He waited. She repeated it, whatever it was, a short sentence. Then she stood gracefully and went up the stairs. "She's gone," said Lewis, "probably lost interest." "Perhaps she went back to her listening devices." "Probably right. If there was an eavesdropper in the building, Occam's razor said it was her." "Nessus asked you to focus your flashlight laser to low and wide, and to use it for lighting when next the woman appears. I am not to show the slaver weapon. The woman could probably kill us both by turning off a switch. She must not see us with weapons." "Then how can we get rid of the zap guns?" A moment before, Speaker relayed the answer. We do not. Nessus says that he will try something else. He is coming here. Lewis felt his head sag against the metal. The relief he felt was so great that he didn't even question it, until Speaker said, He will only have us all in the same trap. Lewis, how can I dissuade him? Tell him so. No, don't even do that. If he didn't know it was safe, he'd stay away. How can it be safe? I don't know. Let me rest. The puppeteer must know what he was doing. He could trust Nessus's cowardice. Lewis rubbed his cheek against the smooth, cool metal. He dozed. He was never less than marginally aware of where he was. If his cycle stirred or shifted, he came wide-eyed out of sleep, clutching metal in his knees and fabric in his fists. His sleep was a running nightmare. When light flashed through his eyelids, he came awake immediately. Daylight poured through the horizontal slit that had served them as a doorway. Within that glare, Nessus's fly cycle was a black silhouette. The fly cycle was upside down, and so was the puppeteer, held by seat webbing rather than crash balloons. The slit closed behind him. Welcome, said Speaker, slurring the words. Can you turn me upright? Not yet. Has the girl reappeared? No, she will. Humans are curious, Speaker. She cannot have seen members of our species before. What of it? I want it to be right side up, Speaker moaned. The puppeteer did something to his dashboard. A miracle happened. His fly cycle turned over. Lewis said one word. How? I turned everything off after I knew that the bandit signal had my controls. If the lifting field had not caught me, I would have turned on my motors before I struck pavement. Now, the puppeteer said briskly, the next step should be easy. When the girl appears, act friendly. Lewis, you may attempt to have sex with her if you think you might succeed. Speaker, Lewis is to be our master. We are to be his servitors. The woman may be xenophobic. It would lull her to believe that a human being commands these aliens. Lewis actually laughed. Somehow the nightmarish half-sleep had rested him. I doubt she'll be feeling friendly, let alone seductive. You didn't see her. She's as cold as the black caves of Pluto, at least where I'm concerned, and I can't really blame her. She had watched him lose his lunch across his sleeve. Generally an unromantic sight. The puppeteer said, She will be feeling happy whenever she looks at us. She will cease to feel happy when she tries to leave us. If she brings one of us closer to her, her joy will increase. Tangent, yes, cried Lewis. You see, good. In addition, I have been practicing the Ringworld language. I believe my pronunciation is correct, and my grammar. If only I knew what more words meant. Speaker had stopped complaining long ago. Inverted above a lethal drop, with burns all over him and one hand charged to the bone, he had raged at Lewis and Nessus for being unable to help him. But he had been quiet for hours now. In the dim quiet, Lewis dozed. In his sleep he heard bells, and woke. She tinkled as she came down the steps. There were bells on her moccasins. Her garment was different, too. A top-shaped, high-necked dress, fitted with half a dozen big, bulging pockets. Her long, black hair fell forward over one shoulder. The serene dignity in her face had not changed. She sat down with her feet over the edge of the platform, and she watched Lewis woo. She did not shift position. Neither did Lewis. For several minutes they held each other's eyes. Then she reached into one of the big pockets and produced something fist-sized and orange. She tossed it toward Louis, aiming it so that it would go past him, a few inches beyond his reach. He recognized it as it went by him, a knobby, juicy fruit he had found on a bush 2 days ago. He had dropped several into the intake hopper of his kitchen without tasting them. The fruit splattered red across the roof of a cell. Suddenly, Louis's mouth was drawing to water, and he was taken with a raging thirst. She tossed him another. It came closer this time. He could have touched it if he had tried, but he would also have overturned the cycle, and she knew it. Her third shot tapped his shoulder. He clung to his 2 fistfuls of balloons and thought black thoughts. Then Nessus's fly cycle drifted into view, and she smiled. The puppeteer had been floating behind the truck-sized derelict. Upside down again, he drifted obliquely toward the viewing platform, as if wafted there by a stray induced current, and, as he passed Louis, he asked, "Can you seduce her?" Louis snarled. Then, realizing that the puppeteer really wasn't mocking him, he said, "I think she thinks I'm an animal. Forget it." "Then we need different tactics." Louis rubbed his forehead against the cool metal. He had seldom felt so miserable. "You're in charge," he said. "She won't buy me as an equal, but she might buy you. She won't see you as competition. You're too alien." The puppeteer had drifted past him. Now he said something in what sounded to Louis like the language of the shaven choir-leading priest. The holy language of the engineers. The girl did not respond, but she wasn't smiling exactly, but the corners of her mouth did seem to turn up slightly, and there was more animation in her eyes. Nessus must be using low power. Very low power. He spoke again, and this time she answered. Her voice was cool and musical, and if she sounded imperious to Louis Wu, he was predisposed to hear that quality. The puppeteer's voice became identical to the girl's. What developed then was a language lesson. To Louis Wu, uneasily balanced above a lethal drop, it was bound to be dull. He picked up a word here and there. At one point she tossed Nessus one of the fist-sized orange fruits, and they established that it was a thrum, and Nessus kept it. Suddenly, she stood up and left. Louis said, "Well, she must have become bored," said Nessus. "She gave no warning." "I'm dying of thirst. Could I have that thrum?" "Thrum is the color of the peel, Louis." He edged his cycle alongside Louis and handed him the fruit. Louis was only just desperate enough to free one hand. That meant he had to bite through the thick peel and tear it away with his teeth. At some point he reached real fruit and bit into it. It was the best thing he had tasted in 200 years. When he had quite finished the fruit, he asked, "Is she coming back?" "We may hope so. I used the tasp at low power, that it might affect her below the conscious level. She will miss it, the lure of it becoming stronger every time she sees me, Louis. Should we not make her fall in love with you?" "Forget it. She thinks I'm a native, a savage. Which brings up the question, what is she?" "I could not say. She did not try to hide it, but it did not come across either. I do not know enough language. Not yet."